Laredo is a border town in South Texas. It is the busiest crossing for commercial traffic on the Mexican border. Just outside the city limits, there is a rancher tending to a broken fence. And he notices a black pickup truck with tinted windows. It's on his property line. It's idling. And he wonders, what is that guy doing? And then the truck pulls away. The rancher sees something on the ground. What is that? So he goes to investigate. And he finds something horrible.
Hi, I'm here at 80 in Jeffries Road, and maybe half a mile to the right. I believe I found a dead body there.
Every homicide case starts with one. But it doesn't always end there.
We had a serial killer in our midst. He's targeting these people.
We didn't know what we were coming up against.
Me sacó la pistola. Help me, help me.
He is not going to stop. They're going to have to stop him.
He's in here. Come out! Just walk away, okay? State police! Hey, 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 hey!
I'm Captain Federico Calderon from the Webb County Sheriff's Office. I've been working for the Sheriff's Office for about almost 18 and a half years. I started off as a patrol deputy and worked my way through investigations and eventually became an investigation supervisor.
Supervision requires an overview that detectives don't have to have. The commander is pursuing everything. If you do it correctly, it consumes you. Calderon is consumed by it, just like I was.
I'm on my way right now. I'm getting in the car.
The call came in on a holiday, so I wasn't at work. But being a supervisor for investigations, you're always working.
To play the game, you've got to be in the game. Sitting behind a desk, you're not going to learn anything. Get out there where the action is.
The crime scene. This is an area which is a sort of a farm road that only the residents that live out there would be traveling on.
It's not a place you would be expected to get called to for a crime scene for a potential murder. The victim was lying face down.
What do we got?
It's a female. No ID.
There was very obvious head trauma, so she was a little bit harder to identify.
Calderon has the same problem anyone does, looking at a gunshot wound to the head in a female. It's just a mass of blood. You can't tell where the hit was or whether it was front to back or back to front. You can't tell until you get him in a morgue.
There was something very unique in this case that the victim was clenching a bag of candy in their hand.
It is often referred to as the death grip, but in reality, it's all the muscles exerting themselves at the same instant, because the nervous system has been disconnected from the brain. So they have this grip that cannot be broken. Also at the crime scene are 3 expended casings from a semi-automatic pistol.
The shell casings They weren't the steel case or the aluminum case. It's a premium brass cartridge. It stood out.
They're 40 caliber, 40 S&W. That caliber is so effective, it is commonly used by law enforcement and by federal agents. It is the kind of ammunition that an average street criminal wouldn't even consider obtaining because it's expensive. So it says to Calderon, whoever this is knows guns.
Good afternoon, sir.
So the next step, of course, is to speak to the person who found the remains. So Calderon questions the rancher.
He said that he saw a vehicle driving around the ranch road, and he assumed that that truck played a role in whatever was happening there.
I didn't see her right away, but I did get a license plate number.
That is a remarkable fact that never happens. Witnesses normally can't tell you what color the car was. This guy's descriptive. He said it's a black pickup with heavily tinted windows, relatively new, nice condition, clean, and this is the plate number, Texas plates. Well, that's a great witness.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Calderon's next step is to go to the morgue and see exactly what we're looking for.
Autopsies are so important. They give us a window into the final moments of that person's life, and they tell us how and why that person died.
They're able to clearly see that she has 3 gunshot wounds to the head, administered close range, less than 18 inches, and further, a gunshot wound of the wrist. If you think about watching someone eating a bag of M&Ms, they often hold it in their hand, and they raise it to their mouth and dump in a few M&Ms. When she takes those rounds, one of them exits her head and goes through her wrist. And that's why she's got that bag in her head. She was eating M&Ms when she's executed by somebody.
She didn't expect what was coming.
So Calderon asked the coroner, what else can you tell me about this girl?
There was a toxicology screen done by the doctor, and it did come back to narcotics. We ran her fingerprints, and she was identified. Our victim was Melissa Ramirez. She is somebody who our investigators and our jail staff was familiar with. She was a habitual drug user who was involved in prostitution as well.
So now it was going to be a challenge for law enforcement trying to find who did this, right? Given the work she did, she's the perfect victim.
There are people in the world who prey upon sex workers because they're easily obtained. You don't have to force your victim into the car. They just get in. So your suspect pool has grown well beyond associates and known persons. But Calderon has something going for him in this case. He's got a license plate of a truck that was inches away from this dead body.
The plan was to identify that vehicle and track down the owner of the truck.
They run the plate, and Calderon is speechless. The registration comes back to a local police officer, Gustavo Lopez. That's who owns the truck. Good God, how could this be? What is he up to next to this body? Calderon has a suspect who is a police officer named Gustavo Lopez. He looks into his history with the department and finds some things that are rather questionable. Lopez tends to be aggressive with the public. A number of complaints had been received about him, and one was so serious, he was placed on probation.
That was a little bit concerning, considering the circumstances.
Let's have a conversation, Gustavo, and see what you have to say. You question a police officer the same way you question anyone else. There is no professional courtesy, particularly when you're considered a suspect, and Calderon has a very good reason to believe he is.
By the time we got around to talking to him, he knew what we were looking for him in reference to.
Was that a piece of property that I was going to buy?
Okay.
He said, I took my 2 kids with me out to that spot to show them a piece of ground I was thinking about buying to see what the view would be like. What body are you talking about?
The body, it was not hidden and it was not hard to see. The idea that a law enforcement officer would have completely not seen that was difficult to work around.
But Calderon checks with the real estate company and confirms that Lopez has been in contact with them for weeks about the piece of ground adjacent to the eyewitness's property.
Right.
I generally don't believe in coincidences, but at the end of the day, we didn't have anything on him to continue with him being a lead suspect. I think, in general, criminal investigations can feel overwhelming. You have to develop your own information, and you have to go out there and talk to family members.
Nobody likes it. It's ugly, it's nasty, but you're the boss. It's your responsibility. Take the responsibility and go deal with it.
Cuando entraron a la galería de mi casa, lo primero que me dijeron, encontramos a su hija fallecida. Sentí que se me fue la sangre. Grité y les dije, pásenle para adentro. No quería que me escucharan afuera llorar. Estaba llorando fuerte.
We talked to Melissa's mom. She was hurting, emotionally and physically, but she gave us a lot of good information about Melissa.
Yo crecí en Nuevo Laredo y de acá pues nacieron mis hijos, acá se criaron. Ella es la más chiquita de mis hijas. Melissa era una muchacha muy alegre. Le gustaba ir a la escuela. Ella decía que quería ser doctora.
She would always have like this good attitude always, and always a happy and good feeling whenever we were together.
Oh my gosh, she had a really particular laugh. Even if somebody would get mad at her, she would say something so you can laugh at it and be like, oh, you can't get mad at her. She did have 2 children. She was the best mother. She made sure those kids had a good family and a good place for them. She loved her kids a lot.
Fue ya de grande cuando se me salió del carril, como dice. Ya después me di cuenta que, pues, por una amiga que empezó a andar mal.
She has an arrest 10 years ago for prostitution. She's also addicted to narcotics.
She would always keep her things to herself. It was really quite difficult for us to help her to see what was really wrong with her.
Many sex workers have a story that begins when they become involved in narcotics. They need money. The only thing left for them is to sell their own body.
The last time I saw her, I was there at my mother-in-law's house, and she wanted to confess something, but she didn't know how to say it.
Fue el 14 de agosto, cuando estábamos ahí en la casa platicando y de repente se sentó en la sala y me dijo, me van a matar, me van a hacer así. Y le dije, no me digas eso, Melissa.
There's this constant drumbeat of violence that's always on the edges of being a sex worker. You are at risk all the time. So Calderon gets a lot of information about Melissa, but what he doesn't get is a solid lead on a possible suspect.
So, in the lack of any leads or evidence, we had to develop our own.
So like any good detective, Fred Calderon went to the source. He wanted to get down to where Melissa was working.
There was a stretch of road, San Bernardo. It's in an older part of town, a bit more run down. It's known for the area that the prostitutes frequent.
Everybody knows if you drive around San Bernardo late night, you're gonna see people picking up people.
Calderon wants to speak to the girls to see if anybody knows Melissa, to see who she hangs out with. Did anybody see her go with anybody?
It was like they say old-fashioned police work. It was exactly that. Driving up on the streets, walking up and down, trying to talk to these people. Even though, for the most part, we're plainclothes, we still looked like cops.
Nothing you could really tell me about that?
That's just her.
It's the last type of person they want to talk to.
Oh, hey. They know who the cops are. They can feel it.
After we explained we're investigating a crime that happened to somebody who was potentially in their same shoes, some people chose to talk to us. Through one of the field interviews, the name Claudine Luetta came up.
She was a sex worker. The same situation of Melissa, that she has addictions. They were really good friends. They work in the same area in San Bernardo.
Which means she could be an eyewitness to who picked up Melissa the night she was killed.
So we attempted to ask around, where is she? Where can we find her?
But Calderon has no luck. No one seems to know where Claudine is. But he does come up with a few names of male customers who are relatively well known among the prostitute crowd on San Bernardo Avenue. So he gathers up these names, gets associated license plate numbers, and he has a plan in mind. His plan includes the United States Border Patrol.
They have, assets that read license plates, and they have databases with unique information that may not be the same information we have or that the state does.
It literally can track every car and where it moves in a 30 square mile area around the city of Laredo, Texas. So this system is quite sophisticated. Calderon is going to provide the list of individuals to Special Agent Juan David Ortiz, who is a supervisor in the surveillance system controlled by the Border Patrol.
We gave them these names, and I said, see what you can come up with on them. Could be previous criminal history that's strictly federal related, whether it be a license plate crossing or who was inside the vehicle with them when they went through the checkpoint or through the bridge or something. You never know.
They search the system for the plate numbers and the individual names. And they get no result. But at the end of the day, an officer who works the San Bernardo Avenue area calls Calderon and says, I have this guy. He was seen with Melissa Ramirez on the night she disappeared, and his name is Dominic Ortega. Now that's really interesting information.
He said that sometimes she'd go to his house, so we felt like he was definitely a lead we had to go after.
And when Calderon plugs his name into the police database, things get really interesting. Mr. Ortega lives less than a mile from where Melissa's body was found. Well, Mr. Ortega, you could be the one. So Captain Calderon receives a tip about a client of Melissa Ramirez named Dominic Ortega.
He lived on the same part of town where the body was discovered.
Calderon goes to speak to Ortega, where his job is,
Dominic Ortega?
What's this about?
and discovers the encounter to be rather confrontive.
We have reason to believe that you were with Melissa the night she disappeared.
But when Calderon tells him that Melissa Ramirez has been murdered, he changes his attitude completely.
He said they weren't strangers. He had picked her up before. She had been to his house.
He is not only a regular customer of Melissa's, he's also her friend.
Can you tell us about that night?
Ortega explains that he picked her up on a date, and they went back to his house, and she got high. And then she passed out.
He obviously hired her for a different reason.
Finally, she woke up, and by this moment, Dominic Ortega had changed his mind. He just took her home. That's the last time he ever saw her.
He was 100% cooperative, and we had information from his employer that he was at a distant location. So we felt that it was very unlikely that this was a person who had committed the crime.
Over the next few days, Calderon feeds a few more names and license plates to Agent Ortiz of the Border Patrol, but they don't work out either. So this case is beginning to lose its force.
Okay. Write it down.
An unsolved murder is always a bad thing, but we were trying and we were exhausting every lead we had.
And then September 13th, 10 days after Melissa was killed, another horrible event occurs in Laredo, Texas.
Web County 911.
I'm on Highway 25, and I've got a female in the grass laying, and I don't know if she's unconscious. She's breathing, but she's got blood all over the grass over here, so y'all better send a paramedic.
Initially, it came in as an auto pedestrian accident. They call it an autoped.
As soon as the EMTs arrive at that scene, EMTs say, no. This isn't from being hit by a car. This woman's been shot in the head.
I crossed paths with the ambulance, so we sent investigators to the hospital. We had hopes that she would be able to tell us anything, something. We began processing the scene. Even from just looking at the crime scene, you could tell that something horrible had happened there. Her property was scattered everywhere. It looked like there were a stretch of drag marks where she tried to crawl after she got injured, leaving the trail of blood.
And then he sees something else that alarms him to no end.
Take a look at that.
3 .40 caliber Smith & Wesson expended casings. It's about a mile away from where Melissa Ramirez was found.
Having two similar cases on the same stretch of road with a very similar weapon, that was out of the ordinary. We felt like we were probably dealing with the same person who had done that to Melissa.
2, 3.
It had all the markings and indications that this was the beginning of a serial killer. I know we have a problem.
This time there's a purse. And the officers at the scene discover that this is, in fact, Claudine Luera, the woman Calderon couldn't find, who is a close friend of Melissa Ramirez. What is going on here? Who might be responsible for this?
Doesn't have a cell phone here.
The purse also contained a prepaid track phone, and it wasn't locked.
Phones can be very helpful. It can tell us a lot about a person.
Could you bag this for us, please?
Calderon is really anxious to speak to the victim, but that's when he learns from the hospital that the victim is never going to speak again.
Sadly, when she was taken to the emergency room, they tried to start to work on her, is when she expired and she passed.
So once again, you have to know your victim, and you have to go out there and talk to family members. That can end up being the investigation key that unlocks what you're after.
When she passed away, I think the whole block heard me yell. It's the worst news. Those words will never leave my mind. Having to hear them say, like, yes, we can confirm that it is Claudine Luera. My first thought was, I need to get to Ciara.
It was a Friday morning. I was working at the Plasma Center downtown. My manager comes to the back and she goes, hey, Ciara, there's someone here to see you. And she was like, it's your aunt. She wants to speak to you. And I peek my head out and I could just see like their body language, like how they were looking at me. No, please don't. Please don't.
Claudine's family is able to tell Calderon a very sad story indeed. She was educated, she was bright, and slowly her life unraveled.
Claudine has 5 children. Ciara was 2 years old at the time when she had the first set of twins. And then, lo and behold, she got pregnant right away with the second set of twins. And then we started noticing with the first set of twins some characteristics. And I think getting the diagnosis of autism really hit her hard. I think that really just, brought her down into a depression. She started getting more to like prescription drugs. And then in 2009, we knew something was going on.
She was like heavily addicted to heroin at the time, and it was hard. I wanted her to do better. I wanted things to be different. I wanted my mom.
Eventually, the 5 children were taken away from her, and she wound up on San Bernardo Avenue as a sex worker.
The day that Melissa's body had been found, my mom actually called me and she spent the night. And we hadn't spent the night together since I was like 13 years old. And I was really in shock. I was like, okay, something's wrong. I just know her saying she feared her life. She knew Melissa wasn't gonna be the only one. Little did I know then that that would be the last time that I'd ever see her again.
To learn that your mother has suddenly been ripped away from you, absolutely devastating. And to make matters worse, now we have 2 victims working in the same industry, killed in exactly the same way in similar locations. And no one has a clue as to who might be responsible.
When the second case happened, Claudine, it was like what is going on?
We had a serial killer in our midst. He's targeting these people. He's targeting sex workers. And I'm telling the sheriff's department, you guys need to find this killer or there's gonna be more. There's gonna be more.
We were feeling the pressure from the community and our bosses as well. We're trying to track down every bit of every lead that we had.
Calderon goes back to check with his tech team regarding the contents of the track phone that Claudine Luera had in her purse.
At that point, we discovered a picture of Claudine with another male taken recently.
There are a number of text messages between Claudine and an individual known as Hector Vega on the night of her murder. They look up Hector Vega. Vega is a drug addict. Vega's committed aggravated assault in the past. Could he be our guy? Absolutely.
So we got back to work and we started looking for him. We have vehicles parked at his house, and at some point he shows up and he realizes that there's some cop cars and he takes off.
If they had any doubts about Hector Vega being a possible suspect, it's been erased by his flight. Innocent people don't run, and Hector is running. Detective Calderon summons a number of cruisers to his location. They try to pursue Hector in his car.
Highway speeds inside the city aren't anything that anybody needs to be doing, ever.
He's weaving in and out of streets, making hard turns. And all of a sudden,
we couldn't see him anymore. The officer said, hey, he's gone. They disengaged, and we tried to find him using other means.
Hector's in the wind. Is that frustrating? Oh, my. Yes, it is. Calderon is well aware. If the suspect moves across the border, his case is doomed.
It's not until the next day we get a call at the police department. Someone wanted to come forward and talk.
Well, guess who it was? Mr. Hector Vega. The runaway guy and skilled stunt driver is now sitting in a police station by his own volition. What happened? Calderon asked Hector, why did you run? Oh, man, I had drugs on me. So I started to run. And then I thought about Claudine. I heard what happened to Claudine. I was friends with her.
He started telling us that they hung out and, used drugs.
We met up for a bit last night, and then she went back out to San Bernardo.
I figured you guys put two and two together, and you think I did this, and I didn't do this.
He said that was the last time he had seen her until he heard that she had been found dead. He was genuinely disturbed and distraught. I'm sure it was difficult for him to try and understand that when she left his company, she ended up getting killed shortly after.
Calderon is experienced and has talked to a lot of people, both suspects and otherwise, and Hector comes across as legitimate. He's not the best person in the world, but he's not a killer.
It's difficult getting your hopes up, and then at the end, falling short. But it's something that happens in any criminal investigation, and you just got to pick up the pieces, reassess, and come up with a new game plan and go forward again.
There's still this maniac serial killer running around killing everyone. And if he's done two, he's going to do more. You know that the person responsible for this picks up women on San Bernardo Avenue. We need to surveil San Bernardo Avenue.
We were driving up and down, looking for anything out of the ordinary.
They see some different cars they haven't seen before. They pass those plate numbers on to the United States Border Patrol by and through Supervisor Ortiz, and nothing comes of it. Nobody emerges as anybody with a history, anybody with anything.
Calderon did a great job in a case of this magnitude. He was relentless, following leads and interviewing people and doing what any good investigator is doing. But being in this line of work for 28 years, sometimes you need a lucky break. In this case, that's what he got.
It is September 14th, day 11 in the investigation, when a Texas state trooper pulls into a gas station to fuel his car.
It's sometime around 9 p.m., out of nowhere. This female comes running to him dressed in jeans, and she doesn't have a blouse or shirt on.
Oh, excuse me. What?
And she's screaming, "He's trying to kill me." The trooper puts his hand in his gun and looks behind her for threats and sees none.
He deploys his body cam.
She's terrified. She's shaking uncontrollably.
Her eyes are just wide open, speaking real fast, unintelligible.
Ahorita te ayudo. Just tranquila.
At this point in time, he's thinking that he's interacting with a drug addict or some homeless person who's just talking gibberish, right? But the more he talks to her, things start to get serious real quick.
Me sacó la pistola y me quería subir y yo empecé a gritar, "Help me, help me."
The guy just pointed a gun at her face.
¿Cómo te llamas?
Erica.
Erica, ¿qué?
Well, now, what does Erica Pena do? She's a sex worker on San Bernardo Avenue. Oh, my.
Being aware that there is an ongoing investigation for somebody killing sex workers, he makes the connection.
Just relax, take deep breaths. So
2 and 2 equals 4. She is a living witness to whoever this killer is, who's already killed 2 and just now attempted to kill a 3rd one.
De sacar las pistolas y yo abrí la puerta. Help, help.
Erica Pena has escaped somebody who just pointed a gun at her face.
I'm very scared.
Don't worry, you're.
I'm afraid, sir.
She is hyperventilating. She's got fear and adrenaline that are going through her.
The girl they killed, Melissa Ramirez, we started talking about her. He got very weird all of a sudden, very nervous.
He did, okay.
She mentioned Melissa's name, Claudine's name, seeing as who she was and kind of the circumstances. The trooper thought that it might have something to do with what me and the ranger were investigating. So he called.
She knows the victim, the girl, the deceased girl. With that in mind, I said, you know what? This probably might be a lead. Yeah, you want me to take over there?
Calderon. He wants to talk to her right now.
The trooper shows up, and she is crying. She's scared. She's convinced that, someone's coming after her to kill her. So I go inside, get her a shirt from somewhere inside the station, and she was able to tell her story. She begins telling us how she knew this client of hers by the name of David, and that David had picked her up on San Bernardo, the same area Melissa and Claudine worked and frequented.
She gets in the truck with him. He said, "I'm going to take you to my house because my wife and kids are away for the weekend." So off they go. Once they get inside, they're just talking.
And the conversation at some point came up about Melissa and Claudine.
And she said his whole demeanor changed.
She says that he was grabbing the back of his neck and that he was making weird noises. And she started feeling really uneasy.
David has a look, like she described, just a real scary look.
Erica felt like he might have had something to do with it, and she started, freaking out, for lack of a better word.
She has this overwhelming sense of nausea, sick feeling in her stomach comes over her.
Y donde yo salgo para afuera me quiero vomitar. I started getting sick. That's when I knew ¿sabes qué te vas a hacer? Go, get out, get out.
She's starting to think, how can I get out of this? And without trying to tip him off, she's asking, take me somewhere.
He suggested stopping near a gas station so she could get something to eat and maybe settle her stomach.
He decides to stop in the back of the gas station, on the side of the street, in the dark. She starts at this moment thinking, it's him. He killed Melissa. He killed Claudine. It's him. He's telling her, stop freaking out.
You're not getting out. You're not getting out.
And as she starts to reach for that door handles, when he pulls that handgun out, brings it across his body and points it to her face. She was gonna be the next victim.
She became frantic and tried to escape. He said that he was trying to hold on to her and he grabbed her by the shirt.
El vato apuntándome con la esa. Así. Abrí la puerta. Estoy gritando. Help! Help!
Come here.
He pulled a shirt directly off her back, and she ran to the gas station where she sees this Texas state trooper fueling his car.
I'm glad we were able to help you.
We felt like we might be finally getting the lead we were after, and that we were looking for a David. She tells us that we need to be looking out for a white pickup truck.
And you know where the house is right now?
No, pero no, vive bien. Vive bien. Quisiera que mi mamá tuviera esa casa.
She doesn't know the address of the house, but she knows the general vicinity.
She has a couple of landmarks in mind. I felt that we could reasonably drive around out there and try and locate the address. So we went to that specific neighborhood and we started looking around.
Ojalá Dios quiera, vea, queremos.
And we had several other investigators and deputies in the car to provide security.
¿Lista?
And all of a sudden she says, wait.
Esa es la casa. Yes, that's the house.
That's the house right there.
Están los steps.
Calderon's headlights come across the sidewalk, and the vomit is on the sidewalk.
And that ended up being what broke the case wide open. So once we got the address, we're checking databases, both public and police databases, to see who are we dealing with.
And when he sees the name, he is absolutely stunned into silence. It's not just someone he knows. It's someone who's working alongside him in this very case. Calderon goes back to the station, runs the address, and now he has the name. He never could have predicted what he finds. The ghost that Calderon has been seeking is, in fact, Juan David Ortiz, a supervisor with the United States Border Patrol and the agent working the case with Calderon.
He was a cop. That completely surprised all of us.
He would have been the last one that any of us would have ever imagined. It is scary to think that he was in there listening, watching, observing as the case was investigated.
Juan David Ortiz, who is now 35 years of age, was born in Brownsville, Texas, and raised by a single mother. He joined the United States Navy out of high school and was trained as a corpsman.
He had been deployed in 2003, had seen action in Iraq. He was a medic for his Marine unit.
When he gets out of the service, he decides to join the Border Patrol. He has an impeccable record. He shows empathy for immigrants coming across the border, migrants. He treats people from suffering from exposure or being in the desert. People call him Doc because of his skills.
There was nothing whatsoever, based on what we saw on Juan David Ortiz's background, that this would have been foreseeable. His record was clean.
This guy was your Laredoan neighbor. He had a steady job, he had a nice house, he had a family, went to church on Sundays. Not what you would think of when you think serial killer.
Humans are complicated, sometimes frighteningly so. How does one go from being an all-American war hero into a psychotic killer?
So we're not dealing with an ordinary criminal. It presents a whole new dynamic.
We're dealing with a Border Patrol agent who we know carries a duty weapon that's a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson, and we know that they get issued federal cartridge ammunition.
So he's using his duty weapon to carry out his rage against sex workers. He was prepared to drop victim number 3 when she interfered with that by escaping his custody. He is not going to stop. They're going to have to stop him.
The race was finding him before more victims and more bodies started to stack up.
We had the security team at his house to see if anyone came back home. That wasn't happening. Nobody got close to the house. We put out information about the plates associated with that white pickup truck being driven by Juan David Ortiz, and that he was being looked for as a person of interest in connection with Melissa and Claudine's murder.
Ortiz is not an idiot. He knows he's being looked for, so he is running.
Almost after Erica's escape, we get notified that a trooper is at a gas station off of San Bernardo.
State Trooper Bradshaw sees that truck matching that description parked in front of a dumpster to the left side of the gas station.
He looks through the window of the gas station, and who does he see? None other than Juan David Ortiz.
He calls it in, and Trooper Obregon also pulls in.
That's the truck right there. He walked inside.
He walked inside?
Yeah.
3845. I'm with Bradshaw. Making contact.
Now you're about to confront someone who is undoubtedly armed. You don't want to confront him in that store. You're putting the clerk at risk and you're putting everyone else. You're going to wait for him to come out.
Juan David Ortiz walks out of the Stripes store.
Hands up!
They are giving him orders.
Turn around!
Juan David Ortiz is not following orders.
Turn around! Turn around!
Get on your knees!
Turn around! Okay.
He starts acting like he's scared and he doesn't know why they want to talk to him.
Okay, I'm gonna explain to you. This truck right here is matching with the potential, with the murders that's been happening within the past 2 weeks. We just need for you to cooperate with us, okay?
It's a very high stress situation.
Just turn around.
Ortiz is thinking about what he's going to do.
Make my way, just turn around and make my way this way, okay? Hey, 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 hey!
And he sees the opportunity and he makes a run for it.
Hey! Hey! Hey!
Our serial killer is finally within reach. You can run, Mr. Ortiz, but you cannot hide.
David Ortiz! Come out! State police!
Just turn around.
Juan David Ortiz has finally been located,
Hey, 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 hey!
but he seems to have no interest in giving himself up.
Hey! Hey!
Ortiz sees an opportunity and he bolts. He's able to get that little lead on these two troopers. And they lose sight of him, running towards the parking lot of the Ava Hotel.
He went inside here. He's in here.
They stop their foot chase and they ask for backup.
He's in here, bro. Yeah.
Ortiz has run into a parking garage. This particular parking garage has several levels. Is he going to steal a car? What's he going to do?
So they think he's inside the building or what? They're pretty sure. Bueno.
A couple minutes after is when I show up with the ranger and the rest of the investigators. Immediately, we set up a perimeter.
We need a unit on that side, bro.
We block off all the exits of the building and of that city block.
So now that they know he's contained in this garage, they call a SWAT team.
Jeans, khaki shirt, bro.
A parking garage is a difficult place to search. They want people with the right equipment and the right protective gear to search this premise.
We're not going in. Let me just get the final. Okay.
While we're organizing the SWAT team to search for Ortiz in the Ava Hotel parking lot, we get a call from a passerby off of IH-35.
911. Okay, I just crossed the Webb interchange over here by mile marker 21 and right underneath the bridge. There's a body. I wasn't sure what it was when I drove past him, but it's a person.
Is our body count suddenly rising?
We send a deputy out there to go check, and he tells me that it's another crime scene. It's a woman face down.
The officer sees Smith & Wesson expended casings.
There's .40 caliber casings again, and we were concluding that it was probably related to Melissa and Claudine's murder.
Calderon's worst nightmare is coming true. Ortiz is continuing his work.
The victim was identified as Griselda Cantu. Also worked in prostitution, also substance abuse problems.
Griselda was a mother, and She was a good person, obviously also addictions and the same problems like the other victims.
If Ortiz escapes that garage without being arrested or killed, more bodies are going to appear. He's on a mission.
Okay, you two guys, let's start leading the way. Let's start moving to where we think this guy is. Let's do it slowly and carefully.
The SWAT team are very well trained, but so is Ortiz. He knows his way around weaponry. The commander of the SWAT team announces the standard plan: clear this place one level at a time. You drive him up. You want him up. High is easy to capture because there is no stairway to heaven.
So we used our tactical team, the SWAT team, and some troopers that went in with our SWAT team.
They formed a stack and they went up the ramp into the parking lot area of the hotel.
David Ortiz! Come out! State police!
By this time, I had made my way up and I was watching from on top. I had a bird's eye view of everything going on down there.
The SWAT team clear the first level. They find nothing. They clear the second level. They still haven't found it. Is he still here? Did he somehow get out of this?
Slow down. Let me get up.
You know, one of the body cam videos, you hear the breathing. That fast-paced, hyperventilating breathing that comes with being in a high-stress situation. Every step they take, you feel that stress, thinking they're gonna be met with gunfire.
I radioed to them to make it to the top of the parking garage so we can check the rest of the parking garage.
Let's go.
As they were finishing searching the last lot,
Hey, Captain, take a look at this.
we were told that Ortiz is posting things on Facebook. And I asked, like, he's posting them now? One of the Facebook messages he posted was, "To my wife and kids, I love you." And the other one was, "Doc Ortiz, checking out, farewell."
This is not a good thing. If he's making his final goodbyes, nothing is more dangerous than that.
Based off of what they told us that he was posting, we didn't know what we were coming up against.
SWAT's mission is to take him, dead or alive. They don't care which.
David Ortiz! Come out!
They assume they're going to get in a gunfight. It's been 5 hours since Erica Pena escaped the clutches of the serial killer Juan David Ortiz. And now Calderon and his SWAT team hope to have him cornered in a parking garage.
We used the SWAT team searching the floor by car, under cars, behind pickup trucks. And as they were finishing searching the last lot,
There was a black truck, and Juan David Ortiz is in that truck.
Get down! Get down! Watch out, watch out.
they started giving him commands, and they took him down.
Let's talk. Got it.
They pull him out of that truck and cuff him.
Where's the weapon at, man?
Hey, where's the weapon?
Huh?
He doesn't have a gun on his person, so he has made the decision not to die and not to kill any policemen.
There's a big sense of relief that nobody was harmed, nobody was shot, that everything worked out.
Hey, you guys want a trophy shot? No. We ain't about that, man. A trophy shot. I took them all the time, bro.
No, Juan, we're not like you. We don't do that.
They immediately put him in a car, asked me what we wanted to do with him, and I had him transported to the substation.
What was that call that you got?
We got him. We got him. Those are the first words I hear, and I just remember saying, okay, you know what, I'll let me get ready and get over there.
At that point, there was some degree of, sleep deprivation, but the case was too important to put on the back burner.
I get into one of the closed circuit rooms, and I take my seat there at the table, and I'm taking notes and just watching this thing play out.
Hey, who's the trooper I spoke, man? The trooper couldn't keep up with me, dude. Tell him he needs to work out some more, man.
He was acting actually pretty cocky. He was very proud of himself that he was able to outrun the troopers, and that gave us a little bit of insight into his personality. Knowing that we were dealing with another cop, it was going to be more of a challenge getting him to talk.
You want to know what?
We decided to approach him calmly and build a rapport with him.
Sounds like you're pretty educated. And looks like you were the law enforcement work out there. Why are we here?
He begins by denying any knowledge of what they're asking him about.
See, but there, you did this.
We bring out photos of the victims. We bring out photos of the crime scene.
This is Claudine. Y'all know what happened to her? She's dead now.
We just want to see his reaction to his work, to what he did.
But you left her? When the trooper found her, she was still talking. That's what she looked like before.
He said he didn't know any of them. It was complete denial, so we locked him into that denial.
She happened today. And the evidence is showing us what they have.
You guys have the evidence? Like I said, I don't recall.
I knew that this was going to be a long night based on what was going on.
You just stayed at the house? You didn't go out?
Slowly, calmly, of course, and as carefully as we could, we were starting to confront him with his own lies.
Because the heroin syringe and a condom in there. That's in your truck with your 40 caliber pistol and your bloody boots.
We found where the gun was, which was in the door panel.
Calderon is pushing his buttons and telling him how much they know about this case and why he will not escape punishment for this. You're just a killer like anybody else, and we're going to hammer you flat.
JD, what about cases? Got the bullets. Where's the bullets?
You're getting past his defensive shield, and you're getting to him.
JD, look at me. Can you please take this off? I'm not going to attack you.
When he asked that question, I'm thinking to myself, take the handcuffs off. Take the handcuffs off. The guy wants to talk. I turn to everybody who's in that room and I say, guys, get ready. Here it comes. And from there, the floodgates open.
Take her out.
He begins to tell us that he did know Melissa and that it's a person he had picked up before.
Can you just buy me something, a drink, buy me something to eat? I'm really bad right now. So we're going,
He says they would have gone and bought some heroin. And she took and injected herself in his truck.
Yeah, she's got a complete deep sleep. Driving around.
At one point, he said she started coming to, and she became belligerent.
He said that she was aggressive. She started to insult him.
They told Calderon she became too pushy. She needed to go away. Well, all right then.
He pulled over to let her go to the bathroom. He said that at that point, he saw the opportunity.
Did she try to assault you? Se salió. And it happened. I got in my truck and I drove straight to my house, took my little wife and kids, and I showered and I laid down.
Wow. Juan, you're really crazy.
And then I was continuing driving on Sunbed. This is where a monster came out.
What happens next is what happens to all people who become killers. Their appetite increases, and the thrill of the bloodletting is what drives them now.
I picked up this stupid chick, and they said we could talk nonstop. Yeah. So she bought her heroin, whatever, and she brings up, hey, did you hear Melissa? Yeah, I've seen it on the maps. And he's all like, would it be really up for we go see it?
She goes, you really want to go there? I'll take you there. As they're driving out there, they start to go on these desolate farm roads in the middle of nowhere. She starts to get scared.
No, dude. No, that. No, dude. No, I don't want to go after her. No. I think he's like really freaking.
She starts pointing at him, saying, it's you. You killed her.
You're probably the killer. You're probably. Get out of my truck.
She was trying to run away, and there had been a struggle. To me, it was not a coincidence that Claudine was killed on the 13th.
We were actively, at one point, looking for Claudine because she may have either mentioned that she saw Melissa or she knows who was with Melissa.
It's probably why he killed her. He didn't want to take any chances.
Then the next day, it was not meant to be the way it happened in America.
Help me.
I really watched this movie around.
After Erica escaped, Juan David Ortiz goes back to his home. He takes out an arsenal of weapons, expecting law enforcement to show up.
Grab my 9mm, grab my 40 cal, start loading them. Grab my AR-15, start loading them.
Law enforcement doesn't show up. He makes a decision to go out and start hunting.
People, they don't have jobs. They're all I want to clean up the streets.
He possesses this resentment towards these workers, and his solution is to get rid of them.
He's just going to eliminate them because they don't matter. They're not human. They're insects, and they have to be stepped on. Wow.
I went outside and I picked up otra chick that I had never, esta I had no idea what she is, I don't know her name.
Ends up being Wisel Cantu. He drives north on I-35. He exits around the 22-mile marker and tells her to get off his truck.
He tells her that he's the one who's been killing the prostitutes.
I said, walk that way, make a left, listen to me. Walk that way, you're gonna go to that area.
He describes how she turns around and tells him, you don't have to do this. You're a good person. I want to pray with you.
Look, please, just go away, okay? I'm telling you to walk away. Just walk away, okay? Walk away.
He loses his temper because she's trying to talk him out of it.
I'm telling you to walk away. You're not listening to me.
Do you think this was like a sick game, or do you think he may have had a change of heart?
I think he was going to kill her the whole time. I think that's just a fact that he interjected in order to minimize his culpability.
All of his conversations are designed to minimize his involvement in something evil because it isn't evil. It's the right thing to do. And I had the courage to do it. Swell.
Catching me out there, I was like, I'm clean up the streets.
At that point in time, the proverbial question is posed, is there anyone else? And Juan David Ortiz says, there's one more that you guys don't know about.
Oh my. Juan David Ortiz has admitted to killing 3 women. But then he tells Calderon there's a 4th victim that he doesn't know about.
As soon as he started saying the location of where he left that person, they took off to go verify.
It was at 13 miles north of Laredo. There was a gravel mound of asphalt, and over to the right in the tall green grass, they were going to find the body.
The victim is 28-year-old Janelle Ortiz, no relation to the suspect. She is transgender and she has been shot in the head.
My name is Rosenda Rochelle Ortiz, and I am Janelle's youngest sister. September 16th, I get that call that you don't expect to hear, that it is Janelle. And I just broke down. I couldn't handle what I heard. Janelle was 9 years older than me. Growing up in her teen years, she was already transitioning. She didn't care what other people thought about her. She was really outgoing. She had a lot of friends. She was just that type of person that you can go up to when you needed a hug, you needed someone to talk to, just someone that was there. I just had that bond with her that I would never have with no other.
By this time, I know that you guys are looking for me because of Erica. All life is coming to an end.
He picked up Janelle Ortiz. He said that he started driving north toward Edge 35.
He says, I was just driving. And I just That's all it is. It's you, isn't it?
Janelle Ortiz asks Juan David Ortiz, "You're gonna kill me, right?" And Juan David Ortiz looks at Janelle and says, "Yeah."
He said that he was surprised that he didn't get any fight out of Janelle Ortiz.
Get out of the truck.
And he pulls into the 13-mile marker. Janelle gets out. Juan David Ortiz walks around his truck, stands behind Janelle.
Turn around.
Shot it one time.
Gets back in his truck, drives back to San Bernardo. He leaves her body right there.
Mr. Ortiz kills 2 women in less than 2 hours. He has to kill more. He's not satisfied yet.
He was going to keep cleaning up the streets, quote unquote, until somebody stopped him.
We just need for you to cooperate with us, okay?
And luckily, those troopers were at the right place at the right time that night.
It was something I've never seen before, never in 28 years, seen something play out the way it did, as descriptive and as animated as he was.
The question always becomes, why did this happen? Men hate prostitutes, in my humble opinion, because they hate themselves for doing what they do, to engage in sex for money. He made a comment, the monster in him came out. I disagree, Mr. Ortiz. You are the monster. It's not inside you. It is you.
When we found out that they had gotten the suspect, it was just shocking news for us to know that it was a Border Patrol, someone that supposedly we need to feel protected.
I really was just so in shock. Like, I couldn't believe, like, it was a Border Patrol agent. I couldn't fathom it. I was just so distraught. It was really, really surreal.
That just, like, threw me over. Like, what do you mean it's a Border Patrol agent? It was hard to grasp.
After all the carnage that Juan David Ortiz left behind, Melissa Ramirez's mom is interviewed, and she comes out there and says, "I'm not in favor of the death penalty."
Y si a él le daban la pena de muerte, no iba a pagar lo que hizo. Pagando que sufra lo que hizo.
For him, it was worth going to trial so that he could maybe get a lesser charge and ultimately a lesser sentence.
It was scary walking into that courtroom, finally seeing him, who he was. I felt the urge to scream so loud, but I couldn't. I just sat there and looked at him, and my tears kept rolling down.
Sentí rabia, sentí mucho coraje, sabiendo que estaba frente al asesino de mi hija.
The truth here is that Juan David Ortiz committed capital murder. He is guilty. We were able to transport, if you will, the jury to the last moments of these victims' deaths. We also put him in the interview room with the Texas Ranger and Captain Calderon.
¿Cómo te llamas?
Erica.
Erica, ¿qué?
Erica was part of the trial, and she had a very important role to play.
Tell us about what you remember when he pulled the gun.
He just pointed it right at me, just like this.
Because of her, we were able to bring justice to the rest of the families.
I support. Like, I hugged her, I cried with her. Like, she's our hero, you know, and she's so strong. I don't have the right words to thank her.
Was it a unanimous verdict?
Yes, it was.
Can you please hand the verdict form to the bailiff? Verdict form. We, the jury, find the defendant, Juan David Ortiz, guilty of the offense of capital murder as charged in the indictment and as instructed in this charge.
The jury was able to arrive at him being guilty of capital murder, life without parole.
So long, Mr. Ortiz. Let's lock you up in a box and feed you bologna sandwiches for the rest of your life and see what you think of that.
I was feeling so relieved. I was like, thank God. Justice with love, the way she did.
Janelle still pops up in my dreams. It's just a reminder, you know, that she's out there looking out for us. I love you, Janelle. You're always in my heart.
No one is above the law, and no one.
On the afternoon of May 23, 2007, hundreds of students walked through the hallways of C.W. Jeffress Collegiate Institute believing they were living another ordinary school day. Classrooms were filled with the familiar rhythm of teachers explaining lessons, chairs scraping against the floor, notebooks opening and closing, conversations whispered just loudly enough to earn a warning from across the room. It was the kind of afternoon that would never make the news. The kind that students forget almost as soon as the final bell rings. Nothing about those first hours suggested that this school, like thousands of others across Canada, was only minutes away from becoming part of the country's history for the worst possible reason. Schools are built on an unspoken promise. Parents leave their children at the entrance each morning with the expectation that they will return home that afternoon. Teachers stand in front of classrooms believing that the greatest dangers they may face are deadlines, difficult exams, or restless teenagers. Hallways echo with laughter because everyone inside shares the same assumption. This is a place where tomorrow is always expected. That promise shattered in a matter of seconds. Somewhere inside the building, a single gunshot cut through the routine. It was not the sound anyone expected to hear inside a Canadian high school. For some students, the noise barely registered. Others paused, uncertain whether they had heard something unusual or simply another loud sound echoing through the concrete corridors. In a place designed for learning, no one immediately imagined that a 15-year-old boy had just been mortally wounded. By the time confusion turned into fear, the damage had already been done. Jordan Manners, a grade 9 student who had celebrated his 15th birthday only days earlier, had been shot inside his own school. The bullet struck his chest. Staff members and emergency responders rushed to help him, and he was transported to hospital. Despite those efforts, he did not survive. One life ended. Countless others changed forever. For many Canadians, the tragedy was almost impossible to comprehend. School shootings were stories seen on television, tragedies unfolding in distant places that felt separated by geography, culture, and circumstance. Canada certainly faced violence, but schools had long been viewed as spaces protected from the kind of horror that seemed unimaginable inside their walls. Then, in one afternoon, that belief was challenged. The death of Jordan Manners became the first fatal shooting of a student inside a Toronto secondary school. The headlines arrived quickly. Television crews gathered outside the school. Parents rushed toward the building desperate for information. Phones rang across the city as families tried to confirm that their children were safe. Behind every classroom door stood teenagers who had begun the day worrying about homework, friendships, or upcoming exams. Before sunset, many of them would instead remember where they were when they learned that someone their own age had been killed only steps away. The questions came almost immediately. How had a firearm entered the school? Who had pulled the trigger? Was Jordan the intended target? Could this have been prevented? For investigators, those questions would become the beginning of a long and difficult search for answers. For Jordan's family, however, no answer would ever be enough. Because every criminal investigation begins in two different places. One begins with evidence. The other begins with loss. Evidence can be photographed, measured, catalogued, and examined. Witnesses can be interviewed. Surveillance can be reviewed. Timelines can be reconstructed minute by minute. Detectives can compare statements, analyze physical evidence, and challenge conflicting accounts. Courts demand proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and every conclusion must survive that standard. Loss obeys no such rules. Loss arrives the moment a family realizes someone they love is not coming home. It settles into empty bedrooms, unanswered phone calls, untouched birthday gifts, and dinner tables with one chair that suddenly remains empty. It does not disappear when the cameras leave or when the headlines fade. It continues quietly, long after public attention moves elsewhere. The story of Jordan Manners exists at the intersection of those two realities. On one side stands a criminal case that resulted in arrests, years of legal proceedings, 2 trials, and ultimately acquittals after prosecutors failed to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. On the other stands the undeniable fact that a 15-year-old boy lost his life inside a place where he should have been safe. Those two truths exist together. One concerns what happened in a courtroom. The other concerns what happened in a school hallway. Neither erases the other. As investigators worked to understand the events of that afternoon, another challenge emerged. Many of the people connected to the case were themselves teenagers. Canadian youth privacy laws protected the identities of the accused because they were under 18 years old at the time of the alleged offense. Much of the evidence presented during legal proceedings would never become widely available to the public in the same way it might in other homicide cases. That legal reality left room for speculation. Speculation filled conversations in neighborhoods, classrooms, and across news coverage. Rumors spread faster than verified facts. Stories changed with every retelling. Some people believed the answers were obvious. Others believed investigators had arrested the wrong individuals. Still others simply struggled to understand how such violence could emerge inside a school community. But speculation is not evidence. And in any criminal case, especially one involving the death of a child, the difference between those two things matters. Years after the shooting, the case would remain one of Canada's most discussed school tragedies, not because every question had been answered, but because so many questions continued to linger. How does a normal school afternoon become a crime scene? How does an entire city lose its sense of security in the span of a single moment? And how can a case that seems so significant end without a criminal conviction? Those questions have no simple answers. This story is not about myths, internet rumors, or dramatic inventions. It is about a real teenager whose life ended at the age of 15, the investigation that followed, the legal process that unfolded over several years, and the lasting impact that one afternoon had on a school, a city, and a country. Because sometimes the most haunting true crime stories are not the ones that end with certainty. They are the ones that leave behind silence. The silence after a classroom empties. The silence inside a family home. The silence of unanswered questions. And it all began on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, when no one walking through the halls of C.W. Jefferies Collegiate Institute could have imagined that, before the school day was over, those familiar corridors would become the setting for one of the most heartbreaking chapters in Canada's history of school violence. In 2007, Toronto was widely regarded as one of the safest major cities in North America, a place where families from every corner of the world built new lives, where neighborhoods reflected dozens of cultures, languages, and traditions. And where schools stood as symbols of opportunity rather than fear. Like countless public schools across the city, C.W. Jefferies Collegiate Institute welcomed students from diverse backgrounds, many of whom were the children of immigrants hoping to create brighter futures through education. Every weekday morning, teenagers poured through its entrances carrying heavy backpacks, unfinished homework, and the ordinary concerns that define adolescence. The building itself was never meant to become famous. It was simply another secondary school where the school bell divided the day into predictable routines, where classrooms filled with conversations about mathematics, literature, science, and history. Where teachers spent years encouraging students to believe that education could open doors beyond the communities in which they had grown up. The hallways connected classrooms, administrative offices, common areas, and the school's athletic facilities, including a swimming pool that served both students and school programs. Hundreds of teenagers moved through these corridors every day, often without giving a second thought to the familiar surroundings. They were places of routine rather than suspense, places where friends met between classes, where laughter echoed after a joke, where students hurried to avoid being late, and where the ordinary rhythm of school life created an atmosphere that felt reassuring precisely because it was so predictable. Parents trusted that when they watched their children disappear through those doors in the morning, they would return home safely in the afternoon. That trust was not unique to one family, it was shared by an entire city. During that period, concerns about youth violence certainly existed in Toronto, and there had been public discussions about gangs, illegal firearms, and crime affecting some neighborhoods. News reports occasionally covered shootings occurring on streets or in residential areas, prompting debates about public safety and community programs. Yet schools remained psychologically separate from those fears. They were viewed as protected environments where disagreements might lead to arguments or fights but not fatal gun violence. Teachers focused on education, guidance counselors worked with struggling students, principals dealt with attendance, discipline, and academic performance, and students planned for exams, sports competitions, and graduation ceremonies. Few could imagine that the threat of lethal violence could emerge inside the very place designed to prepare young people for adulthood. C.W. Jefferies Collegiate Institute reflected both the strengths and challenges of the surrounding community. Like many urban schools, it served students from different economic backgrounds, cultures, and family circumstances. Some teenagers thrived academically, while others faced obstacles outside the classroom that shaped their daily lives in ways their classmates never fully understood. The school community included students with different ambitions, personalities, friendships, and struggles, yet each school day still followed the same familiar rhythm. Bells signaled the beginning and end of lessons. Teachers greeted students as they entered classrooms. Hallways briefly filled between periods before settling into relative quiet as doors closed and learning resumed. It was an environment built upon structure and routine, one that depended on the expectation that each day would resemble the one before it. Among the hundreds of students attending classes that spring was 15-year-old Jordan Manners. To classmates and teachers, he was one face among many moving through the building, another teenager navigating the complicated years of early high school. No one entering the school that week could have known that Jordan's name would soon become recognized across Canada, forever linked to a tragedy that would reshape public conversations about school safety. In the days leading up to May 23, nothing publicly documented suggested that C.W. Jefferies Collegiate Institute stood on the edge of becoming the scene of an event unlike anything Toronto had experienced inside one of its secondary schools. The ordinary nature of that reality is precisely what makes the case so haunting. Tragedies rarely announce themselves in advance. They arrive quietly, hidden beneath routines that appear completely normal until hindsight transforms every ordinary detail into something people desperately wish they had understood differently. Years later, many would look back on photographs of the school and see more than brick walls and classroom windows. They would see the location where a city's assumptions about safety were challenged. The corridors that once represented nothing more than the path from one class to another would become permanently associated with a single afternoon that changed lives forever. Yet before that afternoon arrived, the school existed as thousands of schools do every day, imperfect, busy, sometimes noisy, sometimes calm, but fundamentally ordinary. Students worried about grades, friendships, extracurricular activities, and what they planned to do after the final bell. Teachers prepared lesson plans, graded assignments, and encouraged students to stay focused on their education. Administrative staff managed schedules, attendance records, and the countless responsibilities required to keep a large public school functioning. There was no sense that history was about to unfold within those walls. Looking back from the perspective of today, it is tempting to search for warning signs, to believe that every tragedy leaves obvious clues before it occurs. Human nature encourages that instinct because it offers the comforting illusion that disasters are predictable if only people pay close enough attention. The public record surrounding this case, however, does not support such simple conclusions. While investigators and prosecutors would later argue over evidence, timelines, and responsibility, the broader context remained painfully clear. On the surface, this was another ordinary school day in another ordinary Canadian school. That normality is one of the reasons the case continues to resonate. Violence in places already associated with danger is tragic, but violence inside places associated with safety carries a different emotional weight. Schools symbolize childhood, growth, and possibility. They are institutions built upon hope rather than fear. When violence enters such a space, it affects not only those directly involved but also every parent, student, and educator who begins to question assumptions they once considered unquestionable. The story of Jordan Manners would ultimately become more than a homicide investigation. It would become a turning point in conversations about school security, youth violence, and the responsibilities shared by educators, law enforcement, policymakers, and communities. Those debates, however, belonged to the future. On the morning of May 23, 2007, none of those discussions had yet begun. There were no television cameras outside the school, no national headlines, no public inquiries, no legal proceedings, and no courtroom testimony waiting years ahead. There was only another school day unfolding according to schedule, another collection of students moving from one classroom to the next, another afternoon that appeared no different from hundreds that had come before it. That quiet normality would make what happened next feel even more unimaginable, because the distance between an ordinary school day and a national tragedy turned out to be measured not in years or months, but in only a few irreversible moments. Jordan Manners had only recently turned 15. By every public account available, he was a grade 9 student at C.W. Jefferies Collegiate Institute, standing at the very beginning of the years that so often shape a young person's identity. At that age, life is usually measured in semesters rather than decades, in friendships rather than careers, in dreams that are still forming rather than futures already decided. Jordan's story, like that of so many teenagers, was still being written when it came to an abrupt and irreversible end. Much about his private life remains appropriately protected from public view, and that absence of detail is itself a reminder that behind every headline is a family whose memories belong first to them, not to the public. What is known is simple but deeply significant. Jordan was a 15-year-old student who left home expecting to attend another ordinary day of school and never returned. That fact alone carries a weight that no courtroom transcript or news report can fully express. It is easy, especially in true crime, for attention to drift toward investigations, suspects, legal arguments, and unanswered questions. Yet before there was a homicide investigation, there was a boy whose life had barely begun. Before detectives reconstructed timelines, there were teachers who knew him as one of many students moving through their classrooms. Before reporters gathered outside the school, there were classmates who recognized him as another familiar face in the hallways. Before the case became part of discussions about public safety, there was simply Jordan. Adolescence is often described as a bridge between childhood and adulthood, a period filled with uncertainty but also possibility. At 15, most young people have far more plans than memories. Their ambitions change from month to month. One day they imagine one future, the next day another. Their world is still expanding. Every school year introduces new classmates, new teachers, new challenges, and new opportunities. It is a time when tomorrow feels limitless because tomorrow is assumed to exist. That is what makes the loss of a teenager uniquely heartbreaking. The tragedy is measured not only by the years already lived but by all the years that will never be lived. Every birthday that will never be celebrated, every milestone that will never arrive, every conversation that will never happen becomes part of the loss. For Jordan's family, May 23, 2007, marked the dividing line between two completely different lives, the life they knew before that afternoon and the life that followed it. Families naturally imagine futures for their children. Whether those futures involve university, work, travel, marriage, or simply growing older, they are built on an expectation so ordinary that it is rarely spoken aloud. Parents expect to watch their children become adults. When that expectation is shattered, there is no simple language capable of describing the absence that remains. Public records cannot fully capture that absence, nor should they attempt to. They can establish dates, locations, and legal facts, but they cannot measure the silence left behind in a family home after an unexpected death. Nor can they fully describe the impact on classmates whose understanding of safety and mortality changed in a single afternoon. Jordan's death also carried significance far beyond those who knew him personally. Across Toronto, countless parents saw reflections of their own children in the story. Teachers imagined their own classrooms. Students pictured their own schools. The victim was not a distant public figure or an adult involved in dangerous circumstances. He was a 15-year-old attending classes during the school day. That reality made the tragedy feel immediate and deeply personal to people who had never met him. It challenged assumptions that had long existed about where young people were safest. The image that remained in the minds of many Canadians was not one of crime scenes or courtroom testimony but of an ordinary student whose future ended inside a place dedicated to learning. As the investigation unfolded, Jordan's name inevitably became attached to legal proceedings, media coverage, and public debate. Yet reducing his story to the investigation alone risks overlooking the most important truth in the case. Every homicide begins with the loss of a human life, and every victim deserves to be remembered as more than the circumstances of their death. In Jordan's case, the public record intentionally preserves only limited personal information, a reminder that not every aspect of a victim's life becomes or should become a matter of public consumption. What remains undeniable is that he was a son, a family member, a classmate, and a student whose life ended at an age when most people are only beginning to discover who they will become. That is the enduring tragedy at the center of this case. The investigation, the arrests, the trials, and the public discussions that followed all stem from one irreversible event: the death of a 15-year-old boy whose future was taken away before he had the chance to live it. Long after legal arguments faded from the headlines, Jordan Manners continued to be remembered not because every question surrounding the case had been answered, but because his death became a lasting symbol of the consequences of violence in a place where young people should have felt secure. His story reminds us that behind every case file is a person whose life cannot be reduced to evidence, testimony, or verdicts. Before Jordan Manners became the name of a nationally known case, he was simply a teenager walking the halls of his school, one among hundreds of students expecting another ordinary day, unaware that history would remember him not for the life he had the opportunity to live, but for the tragedy that brought that life to an untimely end. The afternoon of May 23, 2007, unfolded with the quiet predictability that defines nearly every school day. Inside C.W. Jefferies Collegiate Institute, classes were still in session. Teachers continued their lessons, students focused on assignments or waited impatiently for the final bell, and the familiar rhythm of a busy secondary school carried on uninterrupted. There was nothing publicly documented to suggest that this ordinary Wednesday would become one of the darkest days in Toronto's educational history. Then, within a matter of moments, that routine was broken forever. Sometime during the afternoon, Jordan Manners was shot inside the school. According to the publicly established facts, the shooting occurred in a hallway near the school's swimming pool area while classes were still taking place. The bullet struck Jordan in the chest, inflicting a catastrophic injury. What had been an ordinary school corridor only moments before instantly became the scene of a life-threatening emergency. In a place built to educate and protect young people, the unimaginable had occurred. The exact sequence of every movement leading up to the shooting has never been fully reconstructed in public, and many details remain protected or unavailable because the subsequent legal proceedings involved young persons. What is known is that the violence unfolded quickly. There was no prolonged public confrontation, no extended series of events witnessed and understood by everyone nearby. Instead, confusion spread almost immediately. In an environment where loud noises can easily blend into the everyday sounds of a busy school building, it was not immediately clear to everyone what had happened. As staff members became aware that a student had suffered a critical injury, attention shifted instantly from education to emergency response. Teachers who had been focused on lessons moments earlier suddenly faced an entirely different responsibility: protecting and reassuring the students under their care while the situation outside their classrooms rapidly evolved. Students who had begun the day concerned with homework, upcoming tests, or conversations with friends found themselves confronted with uncertainty that few teenagers are ever prepared to face. Somewhere inside the building, Jordan was in desperate need of medical assistance. School staff and emergency responders acted quickly after the shooting was discovered. Their efforts focused on providing immediate aid and transporting Jordan to hospital as rapidly as possible. Every minute mattered. In any critical gunshot injury, emergency medical care becomes a race against time, with responders working to stabilize the victim before definitive treatment can begin. Despite those efforts, Jordan's injuries proved too severe. He later died in hospital. He was only 15 years old, having celebrated his birthday just days earlier. News of his death spread first within the school community and then rapidly throughout Toronto. Parents sought confirmation that their own children were safe. Students contacted family members, while others waited anxiously for reliable information about what had happened inside a place they had always considered secure. Outside the school, emergency vehicles and investigators began arriving as the reality of the situation became increasingly clear. The shooting was not merely another criminal investigation. It represented something unprecedented for Toronto. Never before had a student been fatally shot inside one of the city's secondary schools. That distinction transformed the case almost immediately into a matter of national attention. As reporters gathered outside the campus and early information began reaching television broadcasts and newspapers, the public struggled to process the implications. Canadians had seen stories of school violence in other countries, but many viewed such events as tragedies occurring somewhere else. The belief that schools remained fundamentally safe environments had been deeply rooted in public consciousness. Jordan Manner's death challenged that belief in a way few could have imagined. Almost immediately, questions emerged that investigators themselves had not yet answered. How had a firearm entered the school? Who had been responsible for firing the fatal shot? Had Jordan been specifically targeted, or had something else occurred? Were there witnesses who had seen enough to identify what happened? Could this tragedy have been prevented? In the earliest hours following the shooting, there were far more questions than answers. Detectives faced the difficult task of preserving evidence while simultaneously interviewing students, teachers, and staff members who might possess fragments of information capable of reconstructing the afternoon's events. Yet gathering reliable testimony inside a school immediately after a traumatic incident is never simple. Memories form under stress, perceptions differ, and confusion often accompanies sudden violence. Every statement required careful evaluation against physical evidence and other witness accounts. Meanwhile, the emotional impact extended well beyond the immediate investigation. Students who had expected to return home discussing ordinary school activities instead carried home news that one of their classmates had been fatally wounded inside the building. Teachers who had dedicated their careers to creating safe learning environments were forced to confront an event that challenged their deepest assumptions about the security of their workplace. Families across Toronto watched the unfolding coverage with disbelief, recognizing that what had happened inside C.W. Jeffers Collegiate Institute could not easily be dismissed as an isolated headline. It had occurred during regular school hours, inside an active school, in circumstances that no parent expects when saying goodbye to a child at the beginning of the day. As evening approached, investigators continued their work while the school itself stood transformed. The familiar hallways, classrooms, and common areas no longer represented only education and routine. They had become part of an active homicide investigation. Every section of the building potentially contained evidence. Every timeline had to be reconstructed. Every available fact had to be tested. Yet beneath the growing complexity of the investigation remained one simple and devastating reality that no amount of forensic work could change. A 15-year-old student had left home expecting another ordinary school day. Before that day ended, his life was gone. Everything that followed the investigation, the arrests, the courtroom proceedings, the public debate, and the lasting changes to conversations about school safety in Toronto would begin from that single, irreversible moment in a school hallway on the afternoon of May 23, 2007. When emergency responders and police officers entered C.W. Jeffers Collegiate Institute on the afternoon of May 23, 2007, their priorities were immediate and unmistakable. Medical personnel focused on saving Jordan Manna's life while law enforcement began the difficult process of securing the area where the shooting had occurred. What only minutes earlier had been an ordinary school hallway near the swimming pool was now treated as the scene of a homicide investigation. The transition was both sudden and profound. Corridors that normally carried the sound of students moving between classes became restricted spaces where every object, every visible mark, and every potential piece of evidence had to be preserved. Detectives understood from the very beginning that the first hours after a homicide are often the most critical. Physical evidence can disappear, memories can change, and confusion can unintentionally distort the sequence of events. Their task was not simply to determine that a crime had occurred, that tragic fact was already evident, but to answer the far more difficult questions of how it had happened, who was responsible, and whether enough evidence could ultimately withstand the scrutiny of a courtroom. Because the shooting had taken place inside a functioning secondary school during the school day, investigators immediately faced challenges unlike those presented by many other homicide scenes. Hundreds of students and school staff had been inside the building. Many had moved through nearby hallways before or after the shooting without realizing they might later become important witnesses. Others had heard fragments of conversations or noticed people moving through the school without understanding that those observations could later prove significant. Detectives therefore had to begin the painstaking process of identifying, locating, and interviewing anyone who might possess even the smallest piece of relevant information. In cases involving sudden violence, seemingly insignificant observations can sometimes become essential when combined with other evidence. At that early stage, investigators could not afford to dismiss any possibility. The hallway itself became the center of intense forensic examination. Crime scene investigators documented the location where Jordan had collapsed, carefully photographing and recording the environment before collecting physical evidence according to established forensic procedures. Every step required precision. Investigators searched for anything that might help reconstruct the events leading up to the shooting or identify the person responsible. Because this was a homicide committed inside a public school, preserving the integrity of the evidence was particularly important. Any mistake made during those first hours could later affect the ability to prosecute whoever had committed the crime. Beyond the physical scene, detectives faced another equally important challenge: reconstructing the timeline. They needed to determine Jordan's movements before the shooting, identify who had been in the vicinity, establish when the fatal shot had been fired, and compare witness accounts to determine where they agreed and where they conflicted. Such work is rarely straightforward. Human memory, especially during moments of stress, is imperfect. Different witnesses may honestly recall the same event in different ways, requiring investigators to compare statements against physical evidence rather than relying solely on recollection. As interviews began, police spoke with students, teachers, administrators, and other individuals who had been present in the school that afternoon. Each conversation added another small piece to an increasingly complex puzzle. Some witnesses could describe where they had been. Others recalled seeing Jordan earlier in the day. Still others provided information about individuals who had been near the area where the shooting occurred. At this stage of the investigation, detectives were gathering information rather than drawing conclusions. Every statement had to be tested, corroborated where possible, and considered alongside the growing body of physical evidence. Outside the school, public attention intensified rapidly. News organizations reported that a student had been fatally shot inside a Toronto secondary school, a fact that immediately distinguished the case from previous incidents of school violence in the city. Television cameras remained outside the campus as parents, students, and members of the community searched for reliable information. The sense of shock extended far beyond those directly connected to the school. Across Toronto, families watched the unfolding coverage with disbelief, struggling to reconcile the image of a school as a place of safety with the reality that investigators were now treating part of that school as a murder scene. In the earliest days following the shooting, rumors spread quickly. In any high-profile investigation involving hundreds of potential witnesses, speculation often travels faster than verified facts. Stories circulated within the community, many of them incomplete or inaccurate. Detectives therefore faced the additional challenge of separating rumor from evidence. Public speculation, however widespread, could not substitute for the careful collection of admissible proof. Every conclusion had to be supported by facts capable of surviving legal examination. As investigators continued their work, attention increasingly focused on identifying who might have had the opportunity to commit the shooting. The investigation gradually narrowed as detectives compared witness statements, examined available evidence, and attempted to establish a coherent account of the events inside the school. Those efforts would eventually lead police toward two 17-year-old students who were known to Jordan. 4 days after the shooting, authorities arrested both teenagers and charged them with first-degree murder. Because each accused was under the age of 18 at the time of the alleged offense, Canadian youth justice laws prohibited the public release of their identities. Even with the arrests, however, many important questions remained unresolved. An arrest is not the same as proof of guilt, and investigators understood that the evidence collected during those first crucial days would ultimately be tested in court under the demanding standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Every photograph taken at the scene, every forensic examination, every interview, and every documented observation would become part of that process. Looking back, the investigation's earliest phase represented the foundation upon which the entire case would be built. It was during those first hours and days that detectives sought to transform a chaotic and deeply emotional tragedy into a structured criminal investigation governed by evidence rather than assumption. The hallway where Jordan Manners had been found no longer served only as part of a school building. It had become the starting point of one of the most closely watched homicide investigations in modern Toronto history, an investigation that would ultimately span years, proceed through 2 separate trials, and leave behind legal questions that continued to be discussed long after the courtroom proceedings had ended. As the initial shock surrounding Jordan Manners' death gradually gave way to the painstaking work of a homicide investigation, detectives faced the enormous responsibility of transforming fragments of information into a coherent account of what had happened inside C.W. Jeffers Collegiate Institute. Every homicide investigation begins with uncertainty, but this case presented challenges unlike most others. The crime had taken place inside a busy secondary school during regular class hours, meaning that hundreds of students and staff had been present in the building. Each person had experienced only a small portion of the afternoon, and no single witness possessed a complete picture of the events. Detectives were left to assemble countless individual observations into a timeline that could withstand legal scrutiny. Over the days following the shooting, investigators interviewed students, teachers, school staff, and anyone believed to have been inside or near the area where Jordan was found. Some witnesses recalled seeing Jordan earlier that day. Others described movements through the hallway near the swimming pool or remembered individuals who had been in the vicinity. As with many major investigations, witness accounts did not always align perfectly. Differences in perception, memory, and perspective required investigators to compare each statement carefully against physical evidence and other testimony. Rather than relying on any single account, detectives searched for points where independent pieces of information supported one another. As the investigation progressed, police increasingly focused their attention on 2 17-year-old students who were known to Jordan. The reasons for that focus were based on the totality of the evidence gathered during the investigation. Although much of the specific evidentiary detail has never been publicly disclosed because the accused were minors and the proceedings were subject to the protections of Canada's youth justice system. 4 days after the shooting, authorities arrested both teenagers and charged them with first-degree murder. The announcement represented a significant development, but it did not bring an end to the investigation. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new phase in which detectives and prosecutors worked to determine whether the evidence they had collected would be sufficient to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt in court. The charges themselves reflected the prosecution's theory that the killing had been planned rather than spontaneous. According to the Crown, the evidence indicated that the shooting was not an accident or an impulsive act but a deliberate homicide. Prosecutors would later argue that the 2 accused were the only individuals who had the opportunity to commit the crime. That position, however, would ultimately be tested through the adversarial process of a criminal trial, where every assumption, every witness statement, and every piece of physical evidence would face rigorous examination. Because both accused were under the age of 18 at the time of the alleged offense, Canadian law prohibited the publication of their identities. This legal protection distinguished the case from many other high-profile homicide investigations. Public discussion focused on the evidence rather than the names of those charged, and many details presented during the legal proceedings remained subject to reporting restrictions. As a result, much of what the broader public knew about the investigation came through official court proceedings and publicly available reporting rather than complete access to the evidentiary record. While investigators prepared the case for prosecution, public attention continued to intensify. News coverage examined broader concerns about youth violence, illegal firearms, and school safety throughout Toronto. Community members searched for explanations that might make sense of an event that seemed fundamentally incompatible with the purpose of a school. Questions extended beyond the identities of the accused. How had a firearm entered the building? Could school security have prevented the tragedy? Were there warning signs that had been overlooked? These discussions reflected the public's need to understand not only who might be responsible but also how such an event had become possible. Yet investigators remained bound by a different standard. Their responsibility was not to answer every social question raised by the tragedy but to establish whether the available evidence proved a criminal offense against specific individuals. That distinction became increasingly important as the case moved toward trial. Public concern, media attention, and widespread speculation could never substitute for admissible evidence capable of meeting the legal burden required for conviction. Detectives therefore continued reviewing witness statements, organizing forensic evidence, reconstructing timelines, and preparing for what they knew would be an exceptionally scrutinized prosecution. Despite the arrests, uncertainty remained a defining feature of the investigation. As is often true in complex homicide cases, investigators believed they had identified those responsible, while the defense would later challenge the reliability and sufficiency of that conclusion. The existence of competing interpretations of the evidence did not necessarily indicate misconduct or error. Rather, it reflected the fundamental nature of the criminal justice system, where prosecutors bear the responsibility of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and the accused are presumed innocent unless that burden is met. This distinction would become central to everything that followed. The investigation had produced suspects, arrests, and charges, but those developments represented only one stage in a much longer legal process. Detectives had completed the difficult task of identifying individuals they believed were responsible, yet proving that belief before a jury required something more. Every witness would be questioned. Every inconsistency would be explored. Every piece of evidence would be challenged. The case that had begun with a fatal shooting inside a school hallway was now moving into a courtroom, where assumptions would give way to testimony, evidence would be weighed under strict legal standards. And the pursuit of justice would depend not on public opinion but on whether the prosecution could establish its case beyond a reasonable doubt. It was there, under the careful examination of judges, lawyers, and jurors, that the investigation would face its greatest test. As the investigation into the death of Jordan Manners transitioned into the courtroom phase, the case entered a new and far more complex arena, where facts gathered by detectives would no longer exist in isolation but would instead be tested, challenged, and reinterpreted under the strict rules of criminal law. The arrests of two 17-year-old boys had marked a significant milestone in the investigation, but in many ways, it was only the beginning of the legal struggle that would define the case for years to come. In a Canadian courtroom, particularly one involving charges as serious as first-degree murder, an arrest does not establish guilt. It simply moves the question from the hands of investigators to the structured adversarial process of a trial, where the Crown must prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt and the defense is given full opportunity to challenge every element of that case. This transition is often described as a shift from investigation to judgment, but in reality, it is a shift from reconstruction to scrutiny. Every assumption that may have guided investigative thinking must now withstand legal examination. Every witness statement must be tested against cross-examination. Every piece of forensic evidence must be explained clearly enough to persuade a jury. In the case of Jordan Manners, these demands were amplified by the seriousness of the charge, the age of those accused, and the emotional weight of a school shooting that had already deeply affected the public consciousness. The Crown's theory of the case, as it emerged through the legal process, was that the shooting was not accidental or spontaneous but a planned act of violence. Prosecutors argued that the evidence indicated a level of intent consistent with first-degree murder, and that the two accused teenagers were the only individuals who had both the opportunity and connection necessary to commit the crime. In presenting this theory, the prosecution relied on the cumulative weight of witness testimony, investigative findings, and the reconstruction of events inside the school on the afternoon of May 23, 2007. However, the courtroom is not a place where theories stand unchallenged. It is a place where every assertion must survive rigorous opposition. The defense challenged the reliability of witness accounts, the interpretation of physical evidence, and the conclusions drawn by investigators. They emphasized the inherent difficulties of reconstructing a chaotic event that occurred inside a crowded school environment, where dozens of students were moving through hallways, and where perceptions could easily be influenced by confusion, stress, and incomplete information. They also highlighted the absence of publicly disclosed direct evidence that definitively placed either accused as the shooter in a manner that met the legal threshold required for conviction. Throughout the proceedings, the youth justice system imposed additional layers of complexity. Because both accused were minors at the time of the alleged offense, their identities were legally protected, and significant portions of the proceedings were subject to publication restrictions. This legal framework reflected a broader principle within Canadian law, that young persons are treated differently within the justice system, not only in terms of sentencing but also in terms of privacy and rehabilitation considerations. As a result, the public narrative surrounding the case was shaped not by full transparency but by partial disclosure filtered through court reporting and legal summaries. The first trial began in 2010, more than 3 years after the shooting. By that time, the case had already become a symbol of unresolved tension between public expectation and legal standard. The expectation outside the courtroom was simple, that the individuals responsible for the death of a 15-year-old student inside a school should be held accountable. The legal reality inside the courtroom was more complicated, that guilt must be proven with evidence strong enough to eliminate reasonable doubt, not merely suspicion or belief. As the trial progressed, jurors heard testimony from witnesses who had been inside the school on the day of the shooting. They were presented with the sequence of events as reconstructed by investigators. They were asked to evaluate whether the evidence presented by the Crown met the threshold required for a conviction of first-degree murder. The defense, meanwhile, urged caution, emphasizing inconsistencies and gaps in the narrative presented by the prosecution. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury in the first trial was unable to reach a unanimous decision. The result was a mistrial, meaning that no verdict could be delivered. In legal terms, the case remained unresolved. In practical terms, it meant that the prosecution would have to decide whether to proceed with a second trial or withdraw the charges. The decision was made to continue. The second trial took place in 2011. By this stage, the case had already endured years of legal scrutiny, public attention, and emotional strain. Once again, the courtroom became the setting for competing interpretations of the same set of facts. Once again, the jury was tasked with determining whether the evidence established guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But unlike the first trial, this proceeding concluded more quickly. After less than 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned verdicts of not guilty for both accused. Legally, the case reached its conclusion at that moment. The acquittals meant that the Crown had not met the burden of proof required for conviction. No further criminal proceedings followed, and the prosecution did not pursue an appeal. Yet even with the legal outcome finalized, the broader questions surrounding the case did not disappear. The courtroom process had resolved the question of legal guilt, but it did not resolve the emotional weight of the tragedy or the public's desire to understand exactly what had occurred inside the school on that afternoon in May 2007. The gap between legal outcome and public understanding became one of the defining features of the case. On one side stood the verdicts delivered by a jury operating under strict legal standards. On the other stood a community still grappling with the fact that a student had been shot and killed inside a school, and that the legal process had not produced a conviction. It is within that tension that the significance of the case continues to be discussed. The courtroom did not simply decide the fate of two accused individuals, it also highlighted the limitations of the justice system in cases where evidence is complex, memories are imperfect, and the burden of proof is deliberately high. In the end, the breakthrough in this case was not a dramatic revelation or a single decisive piece of evidence that suddenly clarified everything. It was the legal process itself, unfolding over years, that determined the outcome. And that outcome, while definitive in legal terms, left behind a story that continues to be examined not for what was conclusively proven, but for what remains understood only in part. When the second trial in the case of Jordan Manners came to its conclusion in 2011, the atmosphere inside the courtroom carried a weight that had been building for years. This was not just the end of a legal proceeding, it was the final attempt by the Crown to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that two former teenagers were responsible for a fatal shooting inside a Toronto high school. Every person in that courtroom understood, in their own way, that whatever verdict was delivered would not simply close a file, but would also define how this case would be remembered in the public consciousness. The jury had already been presented with weeks of testimony, competing interpretations of evidence, and detailed reconstructions of the events that took place on May 23, 2007. By this stage, the narrative had been carefully built and just as carefully challenged. The prosecution maintained that the evidence, taken together, pointed toward guilt. The defense argued that it did not meet the strict legal threshold required for conviction, emphasizing that suspicion, inference, and possibility could not replace proof. In a criminal courtroom, the standard is not whether something might have happened or even whether it is likely to have happened, but whether the evidence eliminates reasonable doubt. After less than 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Both accused were found not guilty. In legal terms, this was a complete acquittal. It meant that the Crown had failed to meet the burden of proof required to convict. It did not necessarily declare what did or did not happen inside the school on that afternoon, but it did determine that the evidence presented in court was insufficient to hold the accused criminally responsible under the law. With that decision, the criminal proceedings reached their final conclusion. There would be no further trial, no additional jury deliberation, and no continuation of the prosecution. The legal system had spoken in the only way it could within the boundaries of criminal law. Without proof beyond a reasonable doubt, there could be no conviction. Yet the moment the verdict was read did not feel like closure in any emotional sense. For the family of Jordan Manners, the courtroom outcome could not undo what had already occurred. A son had been lost, and no legal language, regardless of its precision or authority, could reverse that absence. For the accused, the verdict represented legal exoneration, but it did not erase years spent under the weight of serious allegations. For the broader public, the decision introduced a different kind of discomfort, one that often arises in cases where legal outcomes and emotional expectations do not align neatly. Many people had followed the case with the expectation that a clear resolution would eventually emerge, a definitive answer that would assign responsibility in a way that felt complete and final. Instead, what remained was a legal conclusion that resolved the question of criminal liability without fully satisfying the deeper public need for understanding. In the aftermath of the verdict, there was no dramatic revelation, no final confession, and no additional evidence that fundamentally altered the outcome. The case did not end with certainty about every detail of what happened inside the school hallway. It ended with a determination that the evidence presented was not sufficient to meet the standard required for conviction in a criminal court. That distinction is essential to understanding the significance of the outcome. A not guilty verdict in Canadian criminal law does not necessarily mean that an event did not occur, nor does it provide a full historical account of what took place. It means that, within the strict framework of legal evidence and reasonable doubt, the prosecution did not prove its case. That legal standard exists to protect against wrongful conviction, even in cases where public emotion or moral certainty might point in another direction. Once the trial concluded, the formal legal process ended. The Crown did not pursue further appeals, and the matter was not reopened in court. The accused were no longer subject to criminal proceedings in relation to the death of Jordan Manners. From a judicial perspective, the case was closed. But from a societal perspective, it remained very much alive. The shooting had taken place in a school, a setting that carries powerful symbolic meaning. It involved a student, a teenager whose life had barely begun. It had occurred during school hours, in a place where safety is assumed as a baseline condition rather than a fragile expectation. Those elements ensured that the case would not fade quietly into obscurity, even after the legal process had concluded. Instead, it became part of a broader and ongoing conversation in Toronto and beyond about youth violence, school safety, and the presence of firearms in communities. The case also raised difficult questions about the limitations of the justice system in reconstructing events that unfold quickly, in crowded environments, with incomplete or conflicting witness accounts. Even with extensive investigation, forensic analysis, and multiple trials, some aspects of what happened remained subject to interpretation rather than absolute certainty. That reality is not unique to this case, but it is particularly striking in cases involving schools, where the expectation of clarity and protection is especially strong. In the end, the courtroom did what it is designed to do. It applied the law, evaluated the evidence, and reached a verdict based on the standard required in criminal proceedings. It did not exist to provide emotional resolution, nor to fill every gap in public understanding. Its role was narrower but more demanding, to ensure that no individual is convicted unless the evidence proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In the case of Jordan Manners, that threshold was not met in the eyes of the jury. And so the legal journey ended there, not with a definitive narrative of every moment inside that school hallway, but with a conclusion about what could and could not be proven in a court of law. What remained afterward was something more complex than a simple ending. It was a space between legal finality and unresolved public memory, between what the justice system could determine and what a grieving community still struggled to fully comprehend. In the years following the conclusion of the trials, the case of Jordan Manners gradually shifted from an active legal matter into a lasting point of reflection within Toronto's public memory. The courtroom proceedings had ended, the verdicts had been delivered, and the criminal justice system had reached its formal conclusion, yet the impact of what occurred inside C.W. Jeffers Collegiate Institute on May 23, 2007, did not fade with the closing of the case file. Instead, it settled into something quieter but more enduring, a reminder embedded in discussions about school safety, youth violence, and the fragile assumptions that often surround public spaces meant for learning and growth. At its core, the case remains defined by a single irreversible fact. A 15-year-old student was shot inside a school during the school day. That reality alone was enough to alter how many people viewed the boundaries between safety and vulnerability. Schools, long considered among the most protected environments in any community, were suddenly recognized as places that could not be entirely separated from the broader social issues surrounding them. The tragedy prompted difficult conversations among educators, policymakers, and families about how schools should respond to violence when it occurs, and more importantly, how they might prevent it from occurring in the first place. In the aftermath, discussions about security measures in schools became more prominent. Questions were raised about supervision, access control, student support systems, and the role of law enforcement presence in educational environments. In Toronto and other parts of Canada, policy reviews and recommendations contributed to broader efforts aimed at improving school safety protocols. While no single policy change could be directly attributed as a simple solution to the tragedy, the case became part of a larger body of incidents that influenced how institutions thought about preparedness and response. One of the most significant long-term outcomes of the case was not a single reform, but rather a shift in awareness. Educators and administrators were increasingly encouraged to consider not only academic outcomes but also the complex social realities that students bring into the school environment. Support systems for youth, intervention strategies, and community-based approaches to violence prevention gained greater attention. The recognition grew that schools do not exist in isolation, and that the conditions outside their walls inevitably influence what occurs inside them. For the families and individuals directly affected, however, policy discussions and institutional changes could never fully address the personal dimension of the loss. The absence created by Jordan's death remained unchanged by legal outcomes or public debate. Grief does not follow the structure of court proceedings. It does not conclude with a verdict, nor does it resolve itself when public attention moves elsewhere. Instead, it continues in private, often outside the reach of headlines and official reports. That separation between public discourse and private experience is one of the most enduring aspects of cases like this. Over time, public attention to the case diminished, as is common with events that do not produce ongoing legal developments. New stories emerged, other cases captured media focus, and the daily pace of news moved forward. Yet within discussions of Canadian school safety, the name Jordan Manners continued to appear as a reference point, a moment in time that marked a shift in collective awareness. It became part of a broader narrative about how communities understand risk, respond to tragedy, and attempt to prevent similar events in the future. The case also continues to be discussed in relation to the complexities of the justice system itself. The acquittals delivered at trial underscored a fundamental principle of criminal law, that a conviction cannot be based on suspicion or probability alone, but must be supported by evidence that removes reasonable doubt. That principle exists to protect the integrity of the legal system, even in emotionally charged cases. At the same time, the outcome illustrated how legal conclusions and public perception can diverge, particularly in cases where the available evidence does not lead to definitive answers that satisfy broader expectations for clarity. In this space between legal resolution and public understanding, the case remains particularly difficult to categorize. It is neither a closed narrative with complete answers nor an ongoing investigation with active proceedings. It exists instead as a historical event with a defined legal outcome and an unresolved emotional and social presence. The facts that are established are clear: a student was shot and killed inside a Toronto high school, 2 individuals were arrested and tried, and both were ultimately acquitted. Beyond that, much of what people seek to understand about the case remains tied to interpretations, limitations of evidence, and the boundaries of what can be proven in court. Perhaps the most lasting aspect of the case is not found in legal documents or policy discussions, but in the simple and enduring reminder it leaves behind. Schools are built on trust. That trust is not absolute, and it has always depended on the broader conditions of the communities they serve. When that trust is disrupted, even in a single and rare event, the effects extend far beyond the immediate incident. They influence how parents think about sending their children to school, how educators think about safety in their classrooms, and how societies think about the responsibility of protecting young people during the most formative years of their lives. The story of Jordan Manners remains part of that broader reflection. It is a story defined not only by what happened in a school hallway on one afternoon in May 2007, but also by the questions that followed and the conversations that continue in its aftermath. It stands as a reminder that some events do not conclude neatly, even when the legal process has reached its end. Instead, they remain present in memory, in policy, and in the ongoing effort to understand how such a tragedy can occur within a place built for learning, growth, and safety. The story of Jordan Manners does not end in a courtroom, and it does not end in a verdict. It ends in something far more ordinary, and because of that, far more difficult to accept: the continuation of life after a moment that should never have happened. A school that once became the center of national attention eventually returned to its daily rhythm. The hallways filled again with students moving between classes, teachers resumed lessons, and the school bell continued its cycle of beginnings and endings. From the outside, life moved forward in the only way it ever does, quietly, without pause, without acknowledgement of the exact moment everything changed. But for those who remember, the date does not dissolve into the past so easily. May 23, 2007 remains a fixed point in time, a moment that split the experience of a community into before and after. It is not remembered because of spectacle, but because of its simplicity: a student, a classroom building, an ordinary afternoon, and a life that ended too soon inside a place built for learning. That contrast is what continues to echo long after the headlines faded. The legal system reached its conclusion. The evidence was tested, challenged, and weighed under the highest standard known to criminal law. Verdicts were delivered, and the case formally closed. But justice, in the way people often imagine it, is not always something that arrives in a single moment. Sometimes it is a legal answer that satisfies procedure but leaves emotional questions untouched. Sometimes it is an ending that resolves responsibility without fully resolving understanding. What remains, then, is memory. Not the memory preserved in court transcripts or media reports, but the quieter kind, the kind carried by people who were there, by a school community that experienced something irreversible, and by a city that was reminded that safety is never as absolute as it feels in ordinary days. And perhaps that is the only conclusion this story allows. Not resolution. Not certainty. But remembrance. Because long after investigations end and courtrooms fall silent, the most important part of a story like this is not how it concludes in law, but how it continues in the human mind. And in that space, Jordan Manners is not a case file. He is not a verdict. He is the reminder of a life that should have had more time. There are cases that end with answers, and cases that end with questions that grow quieter but never disappear. The death of Jordan Manners belongs to the second category. The legal system did what it was designed to do. Evidence was examined. Witnesses were heard. Arguments were tested under the strictest standard the law allows. And in the end, the courtroom delivered its conclusion. But a legal conclusion is not the same thing as emotional closure, and it is not the same thing as understanding every detail of what happened in a single hallway inside a school on an ordinary afternoon in May 2007. What remains after the trials is not a single narrative that satisfies everyone, but fragments of truth held together by memory, by record, and by the undeniable fact that a 15-year-old student lost his life inside a place that was supposed to be safe. Over time, the case became part of a broader conversation in Canada about youth violence, about schools, and about the limits of prevention and protection in environments that exist inside larger social realities. Policies were reviewed. Discussions were held. Systems were questioned. But no policy discussion, no investigation report, and no courtroom verdict can travel backward in time to change what happened in that moment. For those who study true crime, cases like this often resist simple categorization. There is no neat resolution that closes every thread. There is instead a reality that continues to exist in parallel layers: the legal outcome, the public memory, and the private grief of those who lived closest to the loss. Each layer tells part of the story, but none of them can claim to tell it in full. And so the case remains where many such cases eventually settle, not in silence, but in a kind of echo. A reminder that behind every file number is a human life. Behind every investigation is a community that will measure time differently after the event. And behind every headline is a moment that once began like any other school day, before becoming something it was never meant to be. That is where this story ends. Not with certainty, but with the weight of what cannot be undone. What happened inside C.W. Jeffers Collegiate Institute on May 23, 2007, became more than a single criminal case. It became a moment that forced an entire community to confront uncomfortable questions about safety, youth violence, and the fragile sense of normalcy inside places that are meant to protect and shape young lives. The courtroom process eventually ended. The evidence was weighed, challenged, and judged under the strict standards of law. And in the end, the justice system reached its conclusion in the only way it can, through verdicts based on reasonable doubt, not certainty shaped by emotion or public expectation. But even when a case closes legally, it does not always close in memory. For those who were inside the school that day, and for those who learned about it afterward, the event remains a fixed point in time. A reminder that ordinary days can shift without warning, and that the boundaries between safety and vulnerability are never as absolute as they appear. Over time, the school continued its function, the city continued its rhythm, and life moved forward in the way it always does. Yet certain stories do not fully fade. They remain present in policy discussions, in institutional memory, and in the quiet reflections of people who remember where they were when they first heard what happened. The case of Jordan Manners is not defined only by what was proven in court. It is defined by what was lost in a matter of moments, and by the lasting awareness that followed. It stands as part of a broader history that continues to influence how schools think about protection, how communities think about prevention, and how justice systems navigate cases where evidence, memory, and expectation do not always align. And long after the headlines have disappeared, what remains is not resolution, but reflection. A reminder that some stories do not end with answers. They end with awareness. This is where the record ends. Not because every question has been answered, and not because every detail has been fully understood, but because the legal process has reached the limit of what it can determine. In the case of Jordan Manners, the courtroom delivered its verdicts, and the justice system completed its role as defined by law. Beyond that point, the story moves out of the hands of investigators and into the space of memory, reflection, and time. What remains is not a conclusion that satisfies everyone, but a reality that cannot be changed. A student lost his life inside a school. A community was forced to confront a moment it never expected. And a system of justice, designed to operate on evidence rather than certainty shaped by emotion, reached an outcome within the boundaries it is bound to follow. Years later, the building still stands. The city continues to move forward. New students pass through the same halls, often unaware of the full weight of what once happened there. But for those who know the story, the date does not dissolve into history. It remains a marker of how quickly ordinary life can fracture, and how long the echoes of a single moment can persist. There is no final answer left to find here. Only the reminder that some events do not resolve into closure. They resolve into memory. Beyond the courtroom and beyond the headlines, the case of Jordan Manners sits within a much larger reality that extends far past a single school, a single day, or even a single investigation. It becomes part of a broader conversation about what happens when violence intersects with institutions that were never designed to contain it. Schools, by definition, are built on expectation of safety, expectation of structure, expectation that young people will move through them without encountering irreversible harm. When that expectation is broken, even once, the psychological impact spreads far wider than the physical location where the event occurred. In the years surrounding the case, Toronto, like many large cities, was already grappling with concerns about youth violence, access to illegal firearms, and the social conditions that can lead to conflict among teenagers. These issues rarely exist in isolation. They are shaped by environment, opportunity, community resources, and systemic pressures that develop over time rather than appearing in a single moment. Schools often become the point where these broader realities converge, not because they cause violence, but because they reflect the communities they serve. After the death of Jordan Manners, discussions about school safety in Toronto became more urgent and more visible. Educators and policymakers were forced to re-examine how schools respond to emergencies, how students are supervised in shared spaces, and how early intervention strategies might reduce the risk of violence escalating inside educational environments. These conversations did not produce simple answers. They rarely do. Instead, they highlighted the complexity of trying to prevent rare but devastating incidents in systems that serve thousands of students every day. At the same time, the legal outcome of the case reinforced another difficult reality, that the criminal justice system operates under standards that are intentionally high, especially in cases involving serious charges like first-degree murder. The requirement of proof beyond a reasonable doubt is not flexible, even in emotionally powerful cases. This creates a space where legal conclusions and public perception do not always align neatly. For some, the verdicts represented a failure to achieve accountability. For others, they represented the system functioning exactly as designed, ensuring that no conviction occurs without sufficient proof. Both interpretations can exist at the same time, and both reflect different expectations of what justice is meant to achieve. Over time, as new events enter public attention and news cycles shift, cases like this often move from immediate focus into historical memory. But they do not disappear. They remain embedded in institutional awareness, referenced in policy discussions, studied in legal contexts, and remembered by those directly affected. The physical space of the school continues to function, filled with new students who carry no personal memory of what happened in 2007, yet the history remains part of its past identity. What makes this case persist is not only the legal proceedings or the media coverage, but the tension it leaves behind. A tension between certainty and uncertainty, between what was proven and what remains unresolved in public understanding, and between the way systems process events and the way people emotionally experience them. In that space, there is no final chapter that fully closes the story. Only a continuing awareness that some events reshape the way a community understands itself. And that understanding, once changed, does not fully return to what it was before. What often gets overlooked in cases like this is how long the effects linger after the legal system has finished speaking. Courtrooms operate on closure as a procedural endpoint, but communities do not process trauma in the same way. For those who lived through the immediate aftermath of the shooting at C.W. Jeffress Collegiate Institute, the memory is not anchored to verdicts or legal definitions. It is anchored to the sudden disruption of what was supposed to be an ordinary school day, and to the realization that such an event could occur in a place that, by design, was meant to feel controlled and predictable. In the years that followed, conversations about school safety in Toronto and across Canada gradually shifted from reaction to prevention. Instead of focusing only on how to respond after an incident, attention increasingly turned toward understanding the conditions that can lead to violence among young people in the first place. This included discussions about access to support services, community engagement, conflict resolution programs, and the broader social environments that shape adolescent behavior long before they enter a school building. These conversations are rarely simple, because they exist at the intersection of education, public safety, social policy, and youth development. Schools are asked to be many things at once: places of learning, places of safety, places of intervention, and sometimes even places of crisis response. The weight of those expectations is significant, especially in the aftermath of incidents that challenge the assumption that schools are inherently secure environments. At the same time, the case of Jordan Manners continued to exist in the background of public awareness as a reference point, not because it provides easy answers, but because it resists them. It remains a reminder that even with investigation, prosecution, and trial, some cases do not resolve into a single, universally accepted narrative. The legal outcome provides one form of conclusion, but public understanding often remains more layered and fragmented. This gap between legal resolution and collective understanding is not unique to this case, but it becomes more visible in cases involving young victims and school settings. There is a natural expectation that such events should lead to clear accountability and clear lessons. When the outcome is more complex, it can leave behind a sense of unfinished interpretation, even when the justice system has fulfilled its procedural role. Over time, however, the intensity of public attention fades, replaced by newer events and shifting social concerns. Yet within institutions, the memory often persists in quieter ways. Policies are updated. Training procedures are refined. Emergency response protocols are reviewed. These changes may not always be publicly linked to a single case, but they form part of a broader pattern of institutional learning that follows incidents of severe violence in educational environments. For students entering the school years after 2007, the history of what occurred may exist only as a distant fact, if it is known at all. But for those responsible for maintaining safety and structure within the school system, such events remain part of an ongoing framework for decision-making. They influence how risks are assessed, how supervision is organized, and how support systems are designed for young people navigating complex social realities. And yet, despite all structural responses, there is a limit to what systems can fully account for. No policy, no security measure, and no procedural framework can completely eliminate unpredictability in human behavior. This is one of the most difficult truths that emerges from examining cases like this. Prevention can reduce risk, but it cannot erase it entirely. That reality does not diminish the importance of continued effort. If anything, it reinforces why those efforts matter. Because even when outcomes cannot be guaranteed, the commitment to safer environments, stronger support systems, and earlier intervention remains essential. In the end, what remains from this case is not a single lesson, but a series of ongoing questions that continue to shape how communities think about youth, safety, and responsibility. Questions about how to balance openness and security in schools. questions about how to identify risk without stigmatizing students, and questions about how societies respond when something unthinkable happens in a place designed for learning. These questions do not have final answers. They evolve. And so does the world that continues to ask them. In the end, the case of Jordan Manners does not resolve into a single, clean conclusion that satisfies every layer of human expectation. The legal process concluded years ago, after investigation, arrests, and 2 trials that tested the evidence under the highest standard required in criminal law. The verdicts delivered in court closed the case in a legal sense, affirming that guilt could not be established beyond a reasonable doubt. From the perspective of the justice system, that is the endpoint it is designed to reach, not certainty shaped by emotion or public pressure, but decisions grounded strictly in admissible evidence and legal threshold. Yet beyond the courtroom, the story continues in a different form. Because what happened inside C.W. Jeffress Collegiate Institute on May 23, 2007, is not only a matter of legal record. It is also a moment that became permanently embedded in the memory of a school community, a city, and a generation of students who came to understand something unsettling about the spaces they once assumed were completely safe. Schools are built on routine, structure, and trust. They are meant to be environments where young people grow without encountering irreversible harm. When that expectation is broken, even once, it leaves behind a shift that does not fully reverse with time. For Jordan Manners' family, no legal outcome can redefine the absence left behind. A courtroom can determine responsibility under law, but it cannot restore what was lost in a single afternoon. That separation between legal resolution and human loss is one of the most difficult realities in any case involving a young victim. It is also the reason such cases continue to be remembered long after the legal files are closed. For the wider public, the case became part of a larger conversation about youth violence, school safety, and the limits of prevention. It raised questions that do not have simple answers and do not end with policy changes alone. How do communities protect spaces meant for education without transforming them into spaces defined by fear? How do systems respond to rare but devastating events without losing sight of the everyday reality that schools remain, overwhelmingly, places of learning and growth? These are not questions that belong only to one city or one year. They continue to exist wherever schools operate within broader social environments. Over time, attention shifts. New events take priority. Public focus moves forward, as it always does. But certain cases do not disappear completely. They settle into a quieter place in collective memory, referenced not for sensational detail, but for what they represent, a reminder of vulnerability, of the fragility of ordinary days, and of how quickly life can change in a space that was never meant for tragedy. The final truth of this case is not found in speculation, and not in unresolved questions, but in what is already known and cannot be changed. A student went to school. A normal day began. And it did not end the same way. Everything else, investigation, trial, debate, memory, exists in the space that follows that moment. And that is where the story remains. Not in certainty, but in remembrance.